characteristics of the age in which we live. As compared with other ages of this not yet very experienced world, one of the most notable appears to me to be the just and wholesome contempt in which we hold poverty. I repeat, the just and wholesome contempt. Though I see that some of you look surprised at the expression, I assure you I use it in all sincerity. And I should not have ventured to ask you to listen to me this evening unless I had entertained a profound respect for wealth. True wealth, that is to say. For of course we ought not to respect neither wealth nor anything else that is false. And the distinction between real and false wealth is one of the points on which I shall have a few words presently to say to you. But true wealth I hold, as I said, in great honour, and wholly sympathise with that extraordinary feeling of the present age which publicly pays this honour to riches. Now, it seemed to me that since in the name you have given to this great gathering of British pictures here in Manchester, you recognise them as treasures, as part and parcel of the wealth of the country. You might not be uninterested in tracing certain commercial questions connected with this particular form of wealth. Most persons express themselves as surprised at its quantity, not having known before to what an extent good art has been accumulated here in England, and it will therefore be a worthy subject of consideration. What are the political interests involved in such accumulations? What kind of labour they represent, and how this labour may in general be applied and economised so as to produce the richest results. Now, you must have patience with me. If I am approaching the essence of this subject, I dwell a little on certain points of general political science. To begin, all economy, whether of states, households, or individuals, may be defined to be the art of managing labour. The world is so regulated by the laws of providence that a man's labour, well applied, is always amply sufficient to provide him during his life with all things needful to him. And not only with those, but with many pleasant objects of luxury. And yet further, to procure him large intervals of healthful rest and serviceable leisure. And a nation's labour well applied is in like manner amply sufficient to provide its whole population with good food and comfortable habitation, and not with those only, but with good education besides, and objects of luxury, art treasures such as these you have around you here in Manchester. And by those same laws of nature and providence, if the labour of the nation or of the individual be misapplied, and much more, if it be insufficient, if the nation or man be indolent and unwise, suffering and want result exactly in proportion to the indolence and improvidence, to the refusal of labour, or to the misapplication of it. Wherever you see want, or misery, or degradation in this world about you, be sure either industry has been wanting, or industry has been in error. It is not accident. It is not heaven-commanded calamity. It is not the original and inevitable evil of man's nature which fills your streets with lamentation and your graves with prey. It is only that, when there should been providence, there has been waste. When there should have been labour, there has been lasciviousness. And wilfulness when there should have been subordination. Now, we have warped the word economy in our English language into a meaning which it has no business whatever to bear. In our use of it, it constantly signifies merely sparing or saving. Economy of money means saving of money. Economy of time, sparing of time, and so on. But that is a wholly barbarous use of the word. Economy no more means saving money than it means spending money. It means the administration of a house, its stewardship. Spending or saving, that is, whether money or time or anything else, to the best possible advantage. Economy, whether public or private, means the wise management of labour, and it means this in three senses. First, applying your labour rationally. Second, preserving your produce carefully. And lastly, distributing its produce seasonably. I say first, applying your labour rationally so as to obtain the most precious things you can and the most lasting things by it. Not growing oats in land where you could grow wheat, nor putting fine embroidery on a stuff that will not wear. Secondly, preserving its produce carefully. That is to say, laying up your wheat wisely in storehouses for the time of famine, and keeping your embroidery watchfully from the moth. And lastly, distributing its produce seasonably. That is to say, being able to carry your corn at once to the place where people are hungry, and your embroideries to the places where they are gay, so fulfilling in all ways the wise man's description of the queenly housewife or queenly nation. She riseth while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Strength and honour are in her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. Now, you will observe that this description of the perfect economist, or the mistress of a household, there is a studied expression of the balanced division of her care between the two great objects of utility and splendour. In her right hand, food and flax for life and clothing, and in her left hand, the purple and the needlework for honour and for beauty. All perfect housewifery or national economy is known by these two divisions. Wherever either is wanting, the economy is imperfect. If the motive of pomp prevails, and the care of the nation, the national economist, is directed only to the accumulation of gold and of pictures and of silk and marble, you know at once that the time must soon come when all these treasures shall be scattered and blasted in national ruin. If, on the contrary, the element of utility prevails, and the nation disdains to occupy itself in any wise with the arts of beauty or delight, then not only the energy calculated for exercise in those arts must be entirely wasted, which is bad economy, but also the passions connected with the utilities of property become morbidly strong, and a mean lust of accumulation merely for the sake of accumulation will, or even of labour, merely for the sake of labour, will banish establish at last the serenity and the morality of life as completely and perhaps more ignobly than even the lavishness of pride and the likeness of pleasure. Now, I said a few minutes ago that a nation's labour, well applied, was amply sufficient to provide its whole population with good food, comfortable clothing, and pleasant luxury. But the good, instant, and constant application is everything. We must not, when our strong hands are thrown out of work, look wildly about us for want of something to do with them. If ever we feel that want, it is a sign that all our household is out of order. Fancy a farmer's wife, to whom one or two of her servants should come at 12 o'clock at noon, crying that they had got nothing to do, that they did not know what to do next. And fancy still further the said farmer's wife looking hopelessly about her rooms and yard, which all the while is in considerable disorder, not knowing where to set the spare handmaidens to work, and at last complaining bitterly that she had been obliged to give them their dinner for nothing. That is the type of political economy we practice too often in England. Would you not at once assert of such a mistress that she knew nothing of her duties? And would you not be certain that if the household were rightly managed, the mistress would be only too glad at any moment to have the help of any number of spare hands, that she would know in an instant what to set them to, in an instant what part of tomorrow's work might be most serviceably forwarded, what part of next month's work most wisely provided for, or what new task of some profitable kind undertaken. And when the evening came and she dismissed her servants to their recreation or their rest, would you not be sure that none of them had been overtasked by her, just because none had been left idle? That everything had been accomplished because all had been employed, and the slight labour had been entrusted to the weak, and the formidable to the strong, and that as none had been dishonoured by inactivity, so none had been broken by toil. Now, the precise counterpart of such a household would be seen in a nation in which political economy was rightly understood. You complain of the difficulty of finding work for your men. Depend upon it, the real difficulty for you is to find men for your work. The serious question for you is not how many you have to feed, but how much you have to do. It is our inactivity, not our hunger, that ruins us. Let us never fear that our servants should have a good appetite. Our wealth is in their strength, not in their starvation. Look around this island of yours and see what you have to do in it. The sea roars against your harbourless cliffs. You have to build the breakwater and dig the port of refuge. The unclean pestilence ravens in your streets. You have to bring the full stream from the hills and to send the free winds through the thoroughfare. The famine blanches your lips and eats away your flesh. You have to dig the moor and dry the marsh, to bid the morass give forth instead of engulfing, and to wring the honey and the oil out of the rock. These things, and thousands such, we have to do, and shall have to do constantly on this great farm of ours. For do not suppose that it is anything else than that. Precisely the same laws of economy which apply to the cultivation of a farm or an estate apply to the cultivation of a province or of an island. What would you say to the lord of an estate who complained to you of his poverty and disabilities, and when you pointed out to him that his land was half of it overrun with weeds, and that his fences were all in ruin, and that his cattle sheds were roofless, and his labourers lying under the hedges faint for want of food? He answered to you that it would ruin him to weed his land or roof his sheds, that those were too costly operations for him to undertake, and that he knew not how to feed his labourers nor pay them. Would you not instantly answer that instead of ruining him to weed his fields, it would save him, that his inactivity was his destruction, and that to set his labourers to work was to feed them? Now you may add acre to acre and estate to estate as far as you like, but you will never reach a compass of ground which shall escape from the authority of these simple laws. The principles which are right in the administration of a few fields are right also in the administration of a great country from horizon to horizon. Idleness does not cease to be ruinous because it is extensive, nor labour to be productive because it is universal. Nay, you reply, there is one vast difference between the nation's economy and the private man's. The farmer has full authority over his labourers. He can direct them to do what is needed to be done, whether they like it or not. And he can turn them away if they refuse to work or impede others in their working or are disobedient or quarrelsome. There is this great difference. And even though we know the necessity of authority in the farm, or in the navy, or in the army, we commonly refuse to admit it in the body of the nation. Discipline and interference lies at the very root of all human progress or power, while the laissez-faire, the let alone principle, is in all things which man has to do with the principle of death. It is ruin to him, certain and total, if he lets his land alone, if he lets his fellow men alone, if he lets his own soul alone. His whole life, on the contrary, must, if it is healthy life, be continually one of ploughing and pruning, rebuking and helping, governing and punishing, and therefore it is only the concession of some great principle of restraint and interference in national action that he can ever hope to find the secret of protection against national degradation. I believe that the masses have a right to claim education from their government, but only so far as they acknowledge the duty of yielding obedience to their government. I believe they have a right to claim employment from their governors, but only so far as they yield to the governor the direction and discipline of their labour. And it is only so far as they grant to the men who are set over them the father's authority to check the childishness of national fancy and direct the waywardness of national energy that they have a right to ask that none of their distresses should be unrelieved, none of their weaknesses unwatched, and that no grief, nor nakedness, nor peril should exist for them against which the Father's hand was not outstretched, or the Father's shield uplifted. Quitting, however, at last these general and serious laws of government, or rather bringing them down to our own business in hand, we have to consider that particular branch of human labour which is concerned not with procuring food, but with the expression of emotion. We have to consider the labour of art. But since in art the labour which we have to employ is the labour of a particular class of men, men who have special genius for the business, we have not only to consider how to apply the labour, but first of all how to produce the labourer. How are we to get our men of genius? That is to say, by what means may we produce among us at any given time the greatest quantity of effective art intellect? A wide question, you say, involving an account of all the best means of art education, yes. But I do not mean to go into the consideration of those. I want only to state the few principles which lie at the foundation of the matter. Of these, the first is that you have always to find your artist, not to make him. You can't manufacture him any more than you can manufacture gold. You can find him and refine him. You dig him out as he lies nugget fashion in the mountain stream. You bring him home and you make him into current coin or household plate. But not one grain of him can you originally produce. A certain quantity of art intellect is born annually in every nation, greater or less according to the nature and cultivation of the nation. But a perfectly fixed quantity annually, not increasable by one grain. You may lose it, or you may gather it. You may let it lie loose in the ravine and buried in the sands, or you may make kings' thrones out of it and overlay temple gates with it as you choose. But the best you can do with it is always merely sifting, melting, hammering, purifying, never creating. And there is another thing notable about this artistical gold. Not only is it limited in quantity, but in use. You can make thrones or golden gates with it if you like, but you assuredly can't do anything else with it. You can't make knives out of it, nor armour, nor railroads. The gold won't cut you, and it won't carry you. Put it to a mechanical use and you destroy it at once. It is quite true that in the greatest artists, their proper artistical faculty is united with every other, and you may make use of the other faculties and let the artistical one lie dormant. For aught I know, there may be 2 or 3 Leonardo da Vinci's employed at this moment in your harbours and your railroads. But you are not employing their Leonardo-esque or golden faculty there. You are only oppressing and destroying it. And the artistical gift in average men is not joined with others. Your born painter, if you don't make a painter of him, won't be a first-class merchant or lawyer. At all events, whatever he turns out, his own special gift is unemployed by you, and in no wise helps him in that other business. So there you have a certain quantity of a particular sort of intelligence produced for you annually by providential laws, which you can only make use of by setting it to its own proper work, and which any attempt to use otherwise involves the dead loss of so much human energy. Well, supposing we wish to employ it, how is it to be best discovered and refined? It is easily enough discovered. To wish to employ it is to discover it. All that you need is a school of trial in every important town, in which those idle farmers' lads whom their masters can never keep out of mischief, and those stupid tailors' prentices who are always stitching the sleeves in wrong way upwards, may have a try at this other trade. Only this school of trial must not be entirely regulated by formal laws of art education, but must ultimately be the workshop of a good master painter who will try the lads with one kind of art and another till he finds out what they are fit for. Next, after your trial school, you want your easy and secure employment, which is the matter of chief importance. For even on the present system, the boys who have real intense art capacity generally make painters of themselves. But then the best half of their early life and energy is lost in the battle of life. Before a good painter can get employment, his mind has always been embittered and his genius distorted. A common mind usually stoops to whatever is asked for it and scrapes or daubs its way complacently into public favour. But your great men quarrel with you, and you revenge yourselves by starving them for the first half of their lives. Precisely in the degree in which any painter possesses original genius is the certainty that during his early years he will have had a hard battle to fight, and that just at the time when his conceptions ought to be full and happy, his temper gentle, and his hopes enthusiastic, just at that most critical period, his heart is full of anxieties and household cares. He is chilled by disappointment and vexed by injustice. He becomes obstinate in his errors, no less than in his virtues, and the arrows of his aims are blunted as the reeds of his trust are broken. What we mainly want, therefore, is a means of sufficient and unagitated employment, not holding out great prizes for which young painters are to scramble, but furnishing all with adequate support and opportunity to display such power as they possess without rejection or mortification. And the best field of labour of this kind would be presented by the constant progress of public works involving various decoration. But a more important matter, even than this, of steady employment, is the kind of criticism with which you, the public, receive the works of the young men submitted to you. You may do much harm by indiscreet praise and by indiscreet blame, but remember that chief harm is always done by blame. It stands to reason that a young man's work cannot be perfect. It must be more or less ignorant. It must be more or less feeble. It is likely that it may be more or less experimental, and if experimental, here and there mistaken. If, therefore, you allow yourself to launch out in sudden barking at the first faults you see, the probability is that you are abusing the youth for some defect naturally and inevitably belonging to that stage of his progress, and that you might just as rationally find fault with a child for not being as prudent as a privy councillor, or with a kitten for not being as grave as a cat. But if he deserves your approbation, be sure that you give it to him. Else you not only run the risk of driving him from the right road by want of encouragement, but you deprive yourselves of the happiest privilege you will ever have of rewarding his labour. For it is only the young who can receive much reward from men's praise. The old, when they are great, get too far beyond and above you to care what you think of them. You may urge them then with sympathy and surround them with acclamation, but they will doubt your pleasure and despise your praise. You might have cheered them in their race through the asphodel mountains of their youth. You might have brought the proud, bright scarlet into their faces if you had but once cried to them, "Well done," as they dashed up to the first goal of their early ambition. But now, their pleasure is in memory, and their ambition in heaven. They can be kind to you, but you never more can be kind to them. You may be fed with the fruit and fullness of their old age, but you were as the nipping blight to them in their blossoming, and your praise is only as the warm winds of autumn to the dying branches. There is one thought, the saddest of all, bearing on this withholding of early help. It is possible in some noble natures that the world with the warmth and the affections of childhood may remain unchilled, though unanswered, and that the old man's heart may still be capable of gladness when the long withheld sympathy is given at last. But in these noble natures, it nearly always happens that the chief motive of earthly ambition has not been to give delight to themselves, but to their parents. Every noble youth looks back as to the chiefest joy which this world's honour ever gave him, to that moment when he first saw his father's eyes flash with pride, and his mother turn away her head, lest he should take her tears for tears of sorrow. It is with the pure hope of giving them pleasure that he comes to tell them what he has done and what has been said of him. And this purest and best of rewards you keep from him. You feed him in his tender youth with ashes and dishonour. And then you come to him obsequious, but too late, with your sharp laurel crown, the dew all dried from off its leaves. And you thrust it into his languid hand, and he looks at you wistfully. What should he do with it? What can he do? But go and lay it on his mother's grave. Thus then, you see, that you have to provide for your young men. First, the searching or the discovering school, then the calm employment, then the justice of praise. One thing more you have to do for them in preparing them for full service, namely to make, in the noble sense of the word, gentlemen of them. That is to say, to take care that their minds receive such training that in all they paint they shall see and feel the noblest things. I am sorry to say that of all parts of an artist's education, this is the most neglected among us, and that even where the natural taste and feeling of the youth have been pure and true, you may too frequently discern some jarring rents in his mind and elements of degradation in his treatment of his subject, owing to want of gentle training and the liberal influence of literature. Now, no branch of art economy is more important than that of making the intellect at your disposal pure as well as powerful, so that it may always gather for you the sweetest and fairest things. The same quantity of labour from the same man's hand will, according as you have trained him, produce a lovely and useful work, or a base and hurtful one. And depend upon it, whatever value it may possess by reason of the painter's skill, its chief and final value depends upon its being able to exalt and refine, as well as to please. And that the picture which most truly deserves the name of an art treasure is that which has been painted by a good man. Having discovered our man of genius, we must now consider how best we are to apply our men of genius in making lasting work. Many of you may perhaps remember that Michelangelo was once commanded by Pietro de Medici to mould a statue out of snow, and that he obeyed the command. I am glad, and we have all reason to be glad, that such a fancy ever came into the mind of that unworthy prince. And for this reason, that Pietro de Medici then gave, at the period of one great epoch of consummate power in the arts, the perfect, accurate, and intensest possible type of the greatest error which nations and princes can commit, respecting the power of genius entrusted to their guidance. You had there, observe, the strongest genius in the most perfect obedience, capable of iron independence, yet wholly submissive to the patron's will. At once the most highly accomplished and most original, capable of doing as much as any man could do in any direction that man could ask. And its governor and guide and patron sets it to build a statue in snow, to put itself into the service of annihilation, to make a cloud of itself, and to pass away from the earth. Now this, so precisely and completely done by Pietro de Medici, is what we all are doing, exactly in the degree to which we direct the genius under our patronage to work in more or less perishable materials. So far as we induce our painters to work in fading colours, or architects to build with imperfect structure, or in any other way consult only immediate ease and cheapness in the production of what we want, to the exclusion of provident thought as to its permanence and serviceableness in after ages, so far we are forcing our Michelangelos to carve in snow. The first duty of the economist in art is to see that no intellect shall thus glitter merely in the manner of hoar frost, but that it shall be well vitrified, like a painted window, and shall be set so between shafts of stone and bands of iron, that it shall bear the sunlight upon it and send the sunshine through it from generation to generation. I can conceive, however, some political economist to interrupt me here and say, if you make your art wear too well, you will soon have too much of it. You will throw your artists quite out of work. Better allow for a little wholesome evanescence, beneficent destruction. Let each age provide art for itself, or we shall soon have so many good pictures that we shall not know what to do with them. Remember, my dear friends who are thus thinking, that political economy, like every other subject, cannot be dealt with effectively if we try to solve two questions at a time instead of one. It is one question how to get plenty of a thing, and another whether plenty of a thing will be good for us. Consider these two matters separately. Never confuse yourselves by interweaving one with the other. It is one question how to treat your fields so as to get a good harvest. Another, whether you wish to have a good harvest, or would rather like to keep up the price of corn. It is one question, how to graft your trees so as to grow most apples, and quite another, whether having such a heap of apples in the storeroom will not make them all rot. It may be desirable for us to have much art, or little. But just now, let us keep to the simple consideration how to get plenty of good art if we want it. At all events, it is certainly one of the concerns of political economy to ascertain, if we like, how we can get things in quantities. Plenty of corn, plenty of wine, plenty of gold, or plenty of pictures. I have just said that the first great secret is to produce work that will last. Now, the conditions of work lasting are twofold. It must not only be in materials that will last, but it must be itself in a quality that will last. It must be good enough to bear the test of time. If it is not good, we shall tire of it quickly and throw it aside. We shall have no pleasure in the accumulation of it. So that the first question of a good art economist respecting any work is, will it lose its flavour by keeping? It may be very amusing now and look much like a work of genius, but what will be its value 100 years hence? You cannot always ascertain this. You may get what you fancy to be work of the best quality and yet find to your astonishment that it won't keep. But of one thing you may be sure, that art which is produced hastily will also perish hastily, and that what is cheapest to you now is likely to be dearest in the end. I am sorry to say the great tendency of this age is to expend its genius in perishable art of this kind, as if it were a triumph to burn its thoughts away in bonfires. But I cannot pass without some brief notice our habit of putting a large quantity of thought and work annually into things which are in their nature necessarily perishable and in compliance with the fashion of the day. And there is one such branch of decorative art in which I am sorry to say we cannot indulge ourselves with the hope of doing good to anybody. I mean the great and subtle art of dress. And here I must interrupt the pursuit of our subject for a moment or two in order to state one of the principles of political economy which, though it is sufficiently understood by the leading masters of the science, is not yet acted upon by the plurality of those who have the management of riches. Whenever we spend money, we set people to work. That is the meaning of spending money. We may indeed lose it without employing anybody, but whenever we spend it, we set a certain number of people to work, greater or less, of course, according to the rate of wages, but in the long run, proportioned to the sum we spend. Well, your shallow people, because they see that however they spend money, they are always employing somebody, and therefore doing some good, think to themselves that it is all one how they spend it, that all their apparently selfish luxury is in reality unselfish and is doing just as much good as if they gave all their money away. And I have heard foolish people say, and declare it as a principle of political economy, that whoever invented a new want conferred a good on the community. I have not words strong enough. At least I could not, without shocking you, use the words which would be strong enough to express my estimate of the absurdity and the mischievousness of this popular fallacy. So, putting a great restraint upon myself and using no hard words, I will simply try to state the nature of this fallacy and the extent of its influence. Granted that whenever we spend money, for whatever purpose, we set people to work. And whenever we spend a guinea, we provide an equal number of people with healthy maintenance for a given time. But by the way in which we spend it, we entirely direct the labour of those people during that given time. We become their masters or mistresses, and we compel them to produce within a certain period a certain article. Now, that article may be a useful and a lasting thing, or it may be a useless and perishable one. It may be one useful to the whole community, or useful only to ourselves. And our selfishness and folly, or our virtue and prudence, are shown not by our spending money, but by spending it for the wrong or the right thing. And we are wise and kind, not in maintaining a certain number of people for a given period, but only in requiring them to produce during that period the kind of things which should be useful to society, instead of those which are only useful to ourselves. Thus, for instance, if you are a young lady and employ a certain number of seamstresses for a given time in making a given number of simple and serviceable dresses, suppose 7, of which you can wear one yourself for half the winter and give the 6 away to poor girls who have none. You are spending your money unselfishly. But if you employ the same number of seamstresses for the same number of days in making 4 or 5 or 6 beautiful flounces for your own ball dress, flounces which will clothe no one but yourself, and which you yourself will be unable to wear at more than one ball, you are employing your money selfishly. You have maintained, indeed, in such each case, the same number of people for the same amount of time, But in the one case you have directed their labour to the service of the community, in the other case you have consumed it wholly by yourself. I don't say you should never do this. I don't say you ought not sometimes to think of yourselves only, and to make yourselves as pretty as you can. Only do not confuse coquettishness with benevolence, nor cheat yourselves into thinking that all the finery you can wear is so much put into the hungry mouths of those beneath you. It is not so. It is what you yourselves, whether you will or no, must sometimes instinctively feel it to be. It is what those who stand shivering in the streets, forming a line to watch you as you step out of your carriages, know it to be. Those fine dresses do not mean so much has been put into their mouths, but that so much has been taken out of their mouths. The real political economical signification of every one of those beautiful dresses is just this: that you have had a certain number of people put for a certain number of days wholly under your authority by the sternest of slave masters, hunger and cold. And you have said to them, I will feed you and clothe you and give you fuel for so many days. But during those days you shall work for me only. Your little brothers need clothes, but you shall make none for them. Your sick friend needs clothes, but you shall make none for her. You yourself shall soon need another and a warmer dress, but you shall make none for yourself. You shall make nothing but lace and roses for me. For this fortnight to come you shall work at the patterns and petals, and then I will crush and consume them away in an hour. You will perhaps answer, it may not be particularly benevolent to do this, and we won't call it so. But at any rate, we do no wrong in taking their labour when we have paid them their wages. If we pay for their work, we have a right to it. No. 1,000 times no. The labour which you have paid for does indeed become, by the act of purchase, your own labour. You have bought the hands and the time of those workers. They are, by right and justice, your own hands and your own time. But have you a right to spend your own time, to work with your own hands only for your own advantage? Much more when by purchase you have invested your own person with the strength of others and added to your own life a part of the life of others. You may indeed, to a certain extent, use their labour for your delight. But you must weigh the value of what you ask these workers to produce for you in its own distinct balance. That on its own worthiness or desirability rests the question of your kindness, and not merely on the fact of your having employed people in producing it. And I say further, that as long as there are cold and nakedness in the land around you, so long there can be no question at all but that splendour of dress is a crime. In due time, when we have nothing better to set people to work at, it may be right to let them make lace and cut jewels. But as long as there are any who have no blankets for their beds and no rags for their bodies, so long it is blanket making and tailoring we must set people to work at, not lace. And it would be strange if in any great assembly, which while it dazzled the young and thoughtless, beguiled the gentler hearts that beat beneath the embroidery with a placid sensation of luxurious benevolence, as if by all that they wore in their waywardness of beauty, comfort had been first given to the distressed and aid to the indigent. It would be strange, I say, if for a moment the spirits of truth and terror, which walk invisibly among the masks of this earth, would lift the dimness from our erring thoughts and show us how, inasmuch as the sons exhausted for that magnificence would have given back the failing breath to many an unsheltered outcast on moor and street. They who wear it have literally entered into partnership with death and dressed themselves in his spoils. Yes, if the veil could be lifted, not only from your thoughts but from your human sight, you would see. The angels do see on those gay white dresses of yours strange dark spots and crimson patterns that you knew not of, spots of the inextinguishable red that all the seas cannot wash away. Yes, and among the pleasant flowers that crown your fair heads and glow on your wreathed hair, you would see that one weed was always twisted which no one thought of: the grass that grows on graves. It was not, however, this last, this clearest and most appalling view of our subject that I intended to ask you to take away this evening. Only it is impossible to set any part of the matter in its true light until we go to the root of it. But the point which it is our special business to consider is not whether costliness of dress is contrary to charity, but whether it is not contrary to worldly wisdom. Whether, even supposing we knew that splendour of dress did not cost suffering or hunger, we might not put the splendour better into other things than dress. And there can be no question that all the money we spend on the forms of dress at present worn is, so far as any good purpose is concerned, wholly lost. Mind, in saying this, I reckon among good purposes the purpose which young ladies are said sometimes to entertain of being married. But they would be married quite as soon, and probably to wiser and better husbands, by dressing quietly as by dressing brilliantly. And I believe it would only be needed to lay fairly and largely before them the real good which might be effected by the sums they spend on clothes to make them trust at once only to their bright eyes and braided hair for all the mischief they've a mind to. I wish we could, for once, get the statistics of a London season. There was much complaining talk in Parliament last week of the vast sum the nation has given for the best Paul Veronese in Venice. £14,000. I wonder what the nation, meanwhile, has given for its ball dresses. Suppose we could see the London milliners' bills simply for the unnecessary breadths of slip and flounce from April to July. I wonder whether £14,000 would cover them. But the breadths of slip and flounce are by this time as much lost and vanished as last year's snow. But the Paul Veronese will last for centuries if we take care of it. And yet we grumble at the price given for the painting, while no one grumbles at the price of pride. Time does not permit me to go into any further illustration of the various modes in which we build our statue out of snow and waste our labour on things that vanish. But in closing, as we have been much on the topic of good government, both of ourselves and others, let me just give you one more illustration of what it means from that old art of which the value, both moral and mercantile, is greater than we usually suppose. One of the frescoes by Ambrosio Lorenzetti in the town hall of Siena represents, by means of symbolical figures, the principles of good civic government and of good government in general. The figure representing this noble civic government is enthroned and surrounded by figures representing the virtues, variously supporting or administering its authority. Now observe, what work is given to each? 3 winged virtues, faith, hope, and charity, surround the head of the figure. Faith, as thus represented, ruling the thoughts of the good governor. The faith which enables work to be carried out steadily, in spite of adverse appearances and expediencies. The faith in great principles, by which a civic ruler looks past all the immediate checks and shadows that would daunt a common man, knowing that what is rightly done will have a right issue. And hope attends upon good government, to show that all such government is expectant as well as conservative, never as long as the world lasts to be wholly content with any existing state of institution or possession, but to be hopeful still of more wisdom and power, feeling that its real life consists in steady ascent from higher to higher. And again, the winged charity, which is attendant on good government, has in this fresco a peculiar office. Can you guess what? You will perhaps be surprised to hear that the office of charity is to crown the king. And yet, if you think about it a little, you will see the beauty of the thought which sets her in this function. Since all the authority of a good governor should be only for the good of his people, and that it is only love that makes him accept or guard his crown, and that his chief greatness consists in the exercise of this love, and he is truly to be revered only so far as his acts and thoughts are those of kindness, so that love is the light of his crown, as well as the giver of it. And lastly, His strength depends upon the affections of his people, and only their love can securely crown him and forever, so that love is the strength of his crown as well as the light of it. Then, surrounding the king, appear the dependent virtues, as fortitude, temperance, truth, and other attendant spirits, in one of whom is entrusted the guidance and administration of the public revenues. Can you guess what virtue it is likely to be? Charity, you would have thought, should have something to do with the business, but not so, for she is too hot to attend carefully to it. Prudence, perhaps. No, she is too timid and loses opportunities in making up her mind. Can it be liberality then? No. Liberality is entrusted with some small sums, but she is a bad accountant and is allowed no important place in the exchequer. Instead, the treasures are given in charge to a virtue of which we hear too little in modern times. Magnanimity. Magnanimity. Largeness of heart, not softness of heart, mind you, but capacity of heart. The great measuring virtue, which weighs in heavenly balances all that may be given and all that may be gained, and sees how to do the noblest things in noblest ways. Which of the two goods comprehends and therefore chooses the greater? Which of two personal sacrifices dares and accepts the larger? Which out of the avenues of beneficence treads always that which opens farthest into the blue fields of futurity? That character, in fine, which in those words taken by me earlier for the description of a queen among the nations looks less to the present power than to the distant promise. Strength and honour are in her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come.